Hi, I'm Philip Posner, a retired rabbi and an author of a book about ethical virtues like compassion, moral courage, and empathy, the ability to feel what another person is feeling. I'm 83, and my wonderful wife, Louise, and I live here in Mexico. In 1961, I was arrested in Mississippi for being a freedom rider and sent to a penitentiary. And I am about to tell you what that was like and why we were called freedom riders. But before I do that, I want to ask you, do you ever wonder if you are important, whether you have the power to influence society? In other words, do you think you could make a difference in the struggle against things like injustice? When I was a teenager, I questioned my importance, and then I discovered what was then called the civil rights movement, which ultimately led to my being imprisoned. In fact, what you are looking at now is my prison cell at Parchman Penitentiary in Mississippi, where I did time following my arrest in June of 1961. I'm telling you my story so that you can feel what it is like to be in prison with me, using your empathy, the ability to put yourself in another person's shoes. With empathy and imagination, you will know what it feels like to be locked up with we freedom riders. We were called freedom riders because we rode buses and sat black and white together in segregated buses and in transportation facilities, where in southern states like Mississippi, it was illegal for blacks and whites to live together, forbidden to even sit next to each other. Did you know that? Over 300 of us, mostly students, were arrested. Here, I am looking at photos of some of my fellow freedom riders. But I don't want my story to be only about us. So at the end, I'm also going to tell you about three incredible teenagers who believed they could make a difference and have big time. Have you ever heard of a man named John Lewis who died on July 20th, 2020? Here he is being honored with the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He was a congressman for 33 years, and President Obama called him the soul of the Congress. He was an amazing social activist, arrested 45 times for what he called good trouble. In 1965, he was severely beaten up by a Selma, Alabama sheriff on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, which is named after a Confederate general and leader of a racist organization called the Ku Klux Klan. As an iron bar was coming down on his head, he moved his head slightly, enough that he was badly injured, but thank God not killed. John was also a freedom rider. We were arrested the same day. So consider this an invitation to join me and myself for 39 days and try to feel what it was like for us. However, before you decide whether to join me or not, you obviously need to know what you are getting into. The first 13 freedom riders who boarded a Greyhound bus left Washington, D.C., May the 14th of 1961 on their way to New Orleans. Near Anniston, Alabama, they were assaulted by a car caravan of violent segregationists and barely survived. One of the reasons they did was because of the kindness and bravery of this 12-year-old girl, Jamie McKinney, who, when she saw what was happening in front of her very home, rushed out to aid them as best as she could. Later the same day, Mother's Day, a Trailways bus arrived at the Birmingham station with a group of racist hoodlums. There they assaulted the black and white freedom riders. James Peck and Charles Person were beaten with fists and a lead pipe. Peck's injury required 53 stitches in his head. I was far more fortunate. Our trip by train from New Orleans to Jackson was uneventful. In fact, we were accompanied by FBI agents, although I truly don't know if they were there to spy on us at the direction of their boss, J. Edgar Hoover, or to protect us. I merely experienced being fingerprinted, ordered to undress, body searched, photographed, and then endured imprisonment. First in a large dormitory, and then in the maximum security unit, a compact brick building that appears to rise out of the ground. It comprised 4 cell blocks with 13 cells per block, 2 prisoners to a cell. It was surrounded by a 20-foot high fence topped with barbed wire and 4 concrete posts which could be mounted with machine guns. So new, my young friends, or older friends, are you ready to join me in the cell? Each has a wash basin, a toilet, and a double steel bunk bed with mattresses. Of course, we black and white men are segregated from each other. Every door to the cell block can only be opened by a guard from the outside with a key to an electric control box. The women are in a separate cell block 30 feet from the electric chair. Can you picture them being that close to a place of death? Look at this, the size of my 6 foot by 9 foot cell. Can you imagine living in a place like that for 39 days? So in addition to feeling trapped in such a tiny space, you may also feel lonely, as I occasionally did. Or you may feel a little afraid, particularly when the guards threaten to hose us down with fire hoses because we won't stop singing our Freedom Rider songs. During the day, we can talk to our cellmates, but especially at night, be prepared to hear the occasional scream of one of our inmates having a nightmare, or the rustle of a guard's key as he patrols the corridor in front of our cells. Like me, you may have a hard time falling asleep. Mississippi in June is especially humid and hot, so sleeping comes with our bodies in sweat, and our mattresses have a rotten smell. But most of all, when we cannot sleep, it's because even though we can see, hear, and feel prison life all around us, it's still so difficult to believe that we are here in a state penitentiary, sentenced to 4 months and $2,000 or 6 months for merely sitting with our black and white friends on a bench in the Jackson train terminal, where no one today would bat an eye to see a little black girl sitting. Then, just as we feel like we are about to fall asleep, memory intervenes, and we hear again the reverberating tap of our shoes, echoing our act of conscience as we stride towards the door to the terminal's segregated waiting room. We remember the whispers, a few attempts to break the tension, and the alternating rhythm of our heartbeat with our mind's measure. Stay cool, the sweating palms. Move quicker, there's the door to the waiting room. Trying to sleep, eyes shut, we still see our women colleagues moving in a different direction and hear us men singing, "Black and white together." Bob and Helen Singleton are the UCLA coordinators of the rides. And with your imagination and empathy, I bet as you see Bob watching his wife, Helen, disappear, you can feel his overwhelming anxiety, his wanting to scream out, "Honey, be well, I love you." Outside the waiting room, the police in stony silence stand like a wall while the FBI agents melt away in the afternoon heat. We had not expected them to be present. In 1961, black churches in Alabama had not yet been burned. Schwerner, Goodman, and Cheney had not yet been murdered.
For underneath her borders, the devil draws no line. If you drag her muddy rivers, nameless bodies you will find. Oh, the fat trees of the forest have hid a
For
thousand
their daring to
cries.
register blacks to vote in the Delta of Mississippi. Then, despite the snores of someone from another cell, with memory's recollection, we hear again the raucous voice of Captain Ray bellowing, "Are y'all going to move? Are y'all going to move on?" He says it 3 times, but we remain seated. Black and white together. Nobody moves. We sing, just like a tree that's planted in the water. We shall not be moved. Okay, line up, he shouts, line up. We proudly get into the paddy wagons. Then the words, we shall overcome someday, ring out in unison through barred windows as we see strange towns fly by. Singing provides a sense of solidarity in the face of what seems incomprehensible. Our Freedom Rider friends are a fascinating, brilliant collection of individuals, varied in outlook and background, including our religious identity. Based on a poll we actually conducted, 17 of us were Protestants, 16 were Jews, 8 were Catholics, 3 were Quakers, 4 were atheists, and naturally there were a few who declined to state. Nor were we all students. Some were married with children. When we wake up, it's about 5 in the morning, and already some of our cellmates are starting to talk. Their voices reverberate up and down the cell block corridor. Our discussions range from how to organize a union to a lecture on a fish named Kandiru, or the real lowdown on the boxing game by one of us who was a New Yorker and who had fought in the Golden Glove contests. During one discussion, someone shared, "My mother had a kind of emotional breakdown when she learned that I had signed on to joining the Freedom Rides." His saying that caused us to talk about our parents. I told them how lucky I was that my mother and father's strong Jewish ethics and empathy for how African Americans were treated in the South caused them, the Yiddish is to sheb nachas, to feel a kind of parental pride for my social activism. "Philip," my mother said, "I'm scared for what might happen to you, but I admire what you are doing." What I chose to do was very much connected to my Jewish heritage, shaped by our history. My parents loved to travel, but once when they were planning a trip to Europe, I can still hear my mother's declaration. "Izzy," she called my father, "I can't go to Germany. With everyone I would meet, I would wonder, was he or she a Nazi? Did he or she support Hitler's extermination of fellow Jews? Did that individual extract gold from the dead bodies of those who were shot after they were forced to dig their own graves?" And you, my friends, can you imagine being forced to drink water out of a fountain designated colored only or white only? Go to a restaurant or a bathroom that says whites or blacks only? Can you imagine having attended a concert of great black entertainers like Marian Anderson, Nat King Cole, Sammy Davis Jr., who were paid thousands to perform? Yes, I know for some of you they were way before your time, but believe me, they were loved by masses of people. Yet when they were performing in the South, they had to find a motel or hotel reserved for blacks for one reason only: their race. How about this? Imagine you are an African-American soldier having fought during World War II against Hitler's racism, having seen some of your own black buddies seriously injured or killed. Then when you come home to your town in Alabama, you see German white POWs traveling without any form of discrimination other than the fact that they are prisoners of war, while you must sit at the back of a segregated bus treated as a second-class citizen. Yes, those are some of the reasons I joined the Freedom Rides, because I could not ignore the bigotry in my own country, nor disregard the impact my Jewish heritage had on my feelings about racism. I believe that when our personal history, ethical values, and memory ring true with empathy for the suffering of others, like a towering bell that won't be silenced, we are moved to acts of compassion, righteousness, and moral courage that occasionally even surprise us ourselves. In 1961, there was a real fear of nuclear war, which a year later led to a 13-day showdown that brought America and Russia, then called the USSR, to the brink of nuclear destruction. So we all felt a need to keep up with the news. How, you might ask? One of our colleagues from the Bronx created a little bag which he tied under his testicles, in which he had placed the material to make a crystal radio, which the guards had not found when he had been body searched. In the pen, he put the parts together to make a radio. He listened to the news and shared it with the rest of us. Our backgrounds were diverse. I was the product of a liberal upbringing in white suburbia with only a minimum of social contact with Negroes, as they were called then. Nor had I read any of M.L. King's philosophy of nonviolence, nor had I even heard of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, which co-sponsored the rides with the National Association of Colored People, the NAACP, and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. What we shared was our mutual conviction that racism and segregation in America, as seen especially in the Jim Crow South, was immoral and unjust. Agreeing to join the Freedom Rides meant that we also agreed to accept the movement's commitment to an ethic of nonviolent resistance to possible aggression or violent behavior that might be inflicted upon us. In fact, we had to attend seminars on passive resistance, one of which involved being taken to a bar near the University of Southern California, where we were physically harassed in an effort to intimidate us to see if we would exercise the appropriate passive resistance. I was 21 and a rabbinic student. 2 or 3 black strangers approached me at the bar. "Hey man, dig this whitey." They pressed up against my body. "Look at these dirty white hands." They held up my fingers for all to see as if they were explosive missiles about to ignite the darkness that surrounded us. So, my friends, if you join this social justice movement, you must be prepared to survive what may come your way with moral courage, peacefully, nonviolently, what Mahatma Gandhi called ahimsa, which means responding to your enemy's behavior with love. It was that ethic that inspired the beliefs and actions of M.L. King, who supported but did not participate in the rides. In fact, he had advised us, quote, "You must keep your resistance on the highest level of dignity and discipline. Freedom riders must develop the quiet courage of dying for a cause," close quote. Looking back on it now, I was probably better off not having heard the second part of King's advice. In prison, that ideology and training helped us deal with the harassment we endured, which included the guards shaking every cell door at 4:30 in the morning and denying us anything to read except the King James Bible and the White Man's Viewpoint, a segregationist tract by Carlton Putnam, the then head of Delta Airlines. We were only let out of our cells to take a shower twice a week, nor were we allowed any privileges such as purchase of items or food from the prison store. More importantly, we could only write and receive one letter a week, which was censored, and no packages or visitors except for that of a Catholic priest and Rabbi Perry Nussbaum from Jackson, who, against the wishes of his congregants and fellow clergy, courageously made a weekly round trip of 260 miles to visit any freedom rider who had requested a visit. For Perry's indomitable commitment to social justice and equal rights, he paid a heavy price. First, his synagogue, Temple Beth Israel of Jackson, was bombed, and then his home. There was no styrofoam tray. The food was pushed through the space in our cell door on a metal tray. We were given 5 minutes to gulp it down. The everyday white potatoes, beans, fatback pork, and white pasty bread, which some of our colleagues creatively molded into chess pieces. If you like variety in your food, forget it. The evening meal is simply a rehash of the noon meal, served cold. You will not get any fresh vegetables or fruit. So, like me, when I was released, you too will leave with bloody gums caused by a lack of vitamin C from what is called scurvy. So, do you think you will miss the food that you enjoyed? It was our daily practice before or after we ate to sing. On one occasion, rather than obey an arbitrary order to stop singing, we let loose with a chorus of Freedom Rider songs. As punishment, our mattresses, sheets, etc. were taken away for 3 days, and the blowers turned on all night, making it difficult to sleep on the cold metal bunks without any covering. So I'm wondering now, my viewers, will you comply or to stop singing, or will you continue to sing with the rest of us? Your decision is an important one because giving up our mattresses deprived us of one of our few physical comforts. But like singing, it also gave us a sense of collective purpose, discipline, and resolve, spiritual ingredients that contribute to our survival in a hostile environment. At midnight on July 22nd, that hostile environment almost turned deadly for our colleagues. After protesting their all too often humiliating treatment that included being called and boy, they began singing. For that, 47 of them were forced into 2 6-by-6-foot solitary cells and left there until they began to suffocate. As cruel as the guards could be, occasionally we got to see them as fellow human beings. I still remember vividly standing in my cell, listening to one of them explain his feelings about which for him included the affection he felt for the black servant, Mammy, who largely raised him. It was a surprising emotional experience for those of us who chose to listen to him. Your emotional survival will be enhanced, as was ours, by sharing our feelings about what we most longed for when we were in prison. As we did, the corridor rang out with descriptions of the people and things we missed on the outside. For me, it was a hamburger with fries and a chocolate malt, the freedom to go to a movie of my choice, and a sweetheart's kiss. One of the surprising things about life at Parchman was that the trustees, the upper echelon level of inmates, could have once-a-month visits with their spouses, including private time for sex. As for us, the rumor was that the prison authorities dealt with our sexual appetites by putting something called saltpeter into our food. One's all-consuming fear was that someone would screw up and our bail would not be posted. And until that happened, it was like waiting to be told, you don't have some terrible disease. When one of us was due to be released, the cell block would become abnormally quiet as hope, fear, and empathy coalesced on the turn of a key whose power for freedom was not ours. I was lucky. I only had to wait one day after the time that Cora's attorney posted my bail. And until recently, I gratefully kept his card in my wallet. But there were those who were held in prison as long as 5 days after they were due to be released. Well, particularly my young friends, have I convinced you that you are incredibly important, special, unique, and each of you in your own way can do great things? And that if you look around where you live, see what's happening in our country, the world as it is, you will understand that you too have a purpose with all of us to help build a world with more compassion, empathy, peace, and justice. Speaking of justice, have you finally decided whether you would become a freedom rider? Your decision would have to be made based on what was happening in the 1960s, when seeing thousands of blacks and whites in cities throughout America carrying signs that proclaimed Black Lives Matter would have been a mirage, a joke, for segregationists, a nightmare. 2 months before I got to inhale the breath of freedom, Newsweek magazine reported that a Gallup poll, May of 1961, showed that a majority of Americans, 61%, quote, disapprove of what the Freedom Riders are doing, close quote. And a poll of June 27 showed that, quote, 57% believe that such tactics as sit-ins and freedom rides hurt rather than help the Negroes' chances for integration in the South, close quote. It has been over half a century since those Gallup polls reflected attitudes about racism, change, and social justice. And at our Freedom Rider 50th reunion in May of 2011, I saw and felt the hugs of love and appreciation from both blacks and whites in Jackson, Mississippi. Things have changed, as exemplified by Governor Barber's breakfast for us, where he actually apologized for our arrests. And there were 23 black senators in the state legislature at that time, and a black warden at Parchman, where we were served, instead of fatback and slimy okra, the best barbecue I have ever tasted. If you decided to join We Freedom Riders, I hope it was because of your empathy for how it was when we were not so welcomed, to say the least, by the white community. And if you were able to feel what we endured, you have learned what it was like to be part of one of the most important events in the continuing civil rights struggle for equal justice in America. On May of 2011, Oprah Winfrey kindly brought us Freedom Riders to Chicago to be on her TV show. Occasionally, I have been asked, did she give you anything? Yes, she gave us a well-written book by Raymond Arsenault, The Freedom Riders. At the end of his book, he writes, in the process of delivering the movement's message of nonviolence, the Freedom Riders became experiential learners, acquiring truths about themselves and the human condition. Wherever they found themselves, on buses and terminal waiting rooms and mass meetings in the jails and prisons of the benighted South, they absorbed the concrete lessons of struggle. Some were hard and sobering lessons about the intractability of racial hatred and entrenched privilege. But others were hopeful and inspiring, demonstrating the expansive possibilities of individual and collective action, close quote. The historian is correct. But for me, the lessons learned also have to do with patiently enduring the struggle and to not give up hope that everyone can make a difference. As taught by my 2,000-year-old social action mentor, Rabbi Tarfon. Lo alecha hamlacha ligmor, v'lo ata ben chorin lehibatel mimena. Now, 59 years older, I am not only grateful to have survived, but to live at a time when so many in America and throughout the world actively oppose racism, hatred, and bigotry. Martin Luther King once wrote, quote, "The ultimate aim of our struggle is to create better relations with our opponent rather than defeat and humiliate him," close quote. Now at 83, I know that to survive defeat, humiliation, and suffering is often just a matter of sheer good luck. It also requires patience and faith, and especially the attribute of moral courage, as seen with these teenagers. Amika George, at 17, was so appalled that many girls were too poor to have sanitary products during their period. She founded an organization that 2 years ago moved the English government to fund free sanitary products for all girls in English schools and colleges. And I bet you have heard of Greta Thunberg, the Swedish environmental activist who, when she was 15, became famous throughout the world because of the speech she gave at the 2018 United Nations Climate Summit, when she demanded that world leaders take immediate action on the climate. Lastly, one of the most incredible teens of all times is Anne Frank, who I'm sure you have heard of. When she was 16, just before she was taken away to die at Auschwitz, the Nazi extermination camp, she wrote in the front cover of her diary these simple words: "Be kind and have courage." What more can be said about the moral courage that everyone is capable of making a difference, as with each of you in your own way? My friends, young and old, thank you for accompanying me as I shared this life-altering experience with you. Now, may the appetizer for justice you have tasted with your empathy sustain you for your own future full course of social justice and activism for a better America and world. And if you are a teacher or a student, and I am honored to be invited to visit your classroom via Zoom, I look forward to answering your questions and hearing your thoughts and decision as to whether you would have joined me in my prison cell. Now, will you join me in singing? What side are you on, boy? What side are you on? They tell me here in Jackson there are no neutrals yet. You're either a freedom rider or a Tom for Governor Ross Barnett. My father was a freedom fighter, and a fighter's son is I. And I'm gonna keep on fighting here until the day I die. Molto bene.